So welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening for Virtual Insights, Bisa Butler in conversation with Dr. Myra Brown-Green. My name is Persephone and I organize public programs at the American Folk Art Museum in New York City. We are so thrilled to be joined by so many of you online this evening. And for this program, we had hundreds of people register. We were just delighted. As many of you are familiar with AFAM, our museum is dedicated to expanding the appreciation and understanding of self-taught art across time and place. And while we cannot wait to safely welcome everyone back to our galleries in Manhattan and Queens, we're grateful for opportunities like this one to connect online. As we tune in from our homes this evening, we want to begin by taking a moment to recognize all who are fighting for racial justice and meaningful change in our local communities and around the world. We've convened tonight's program to take a closer look at works from our collection, but most importantly, to reflect both on the current critical moment and its historical roots by asking in particular how we can learn from artists who reinterpret the past for new meaning in the present. Our speakers this evening bridge generations and connect traditions through their artwork and research that centers African American and African history, heritage, and culture. We are deeply honored to share virtual space with both Bisa Butler and Dr. Myra Brown-Green this evening.
Thank you.
We're going to thank you. We're really just so happy to be here together. We're going to begin tonight's program with brief introductions before turning to presentations from Bisa and Myra, followed by a conversation and a reflection on works that they've selected from the collection before we close with a Q&A. And as we said when we were starting, this is a webinar, so we won't be able to see or hear everyone who's here in attendance tonight, but we do want to invite you to participate by using the Q&A feature at the bottom center of your screen to submit questions for our speakers, which we'll address at the end of the program as time allows. Just to the right of the Q&A feature, again, you'll see that we have closed captions available tonight. You can click on the arrow just there and you can select to view subtitles if you'd like to see those as well. And a final note that this program is being recorded and will be published online following the conversation. And many thanks to our Director of IT, Richard Ho, for invaluable technical support tonight, and Natalie Bell for her support as well. So without further ado, it's my immense pleasure to introduce Bisa and Dr. Green this evening. Artist Bisa Butler creates vivid, colorful, quilted portraits that celebrate African-American life and culture. She was born and raised in New Jersey, the daughter of educators. And I saw that we have a number of people from New Jersey joining us online this evening. Formerly trained as an artist, she holds a BFA from Howard University and an MAT from Montclair State University, and is now represented by the Claire Oliver Gallery in Harlem. Bisa's work has been exhibited throughout the United States and internationally, and has been acquired by institutions including the Art Institute of Chicago, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Newark Museum, Toledo Museum of Art, and Minneapolis Institute of Art, among many others. She will have 2 solo museum shows this year, the first at the Katona Museum of Art, which has just reopened, and the second at the Art Institute of Chicago. Finally, her work will also be included in 2 important upcoming quilt exhibitions at the MFA Boston and the Toledo Museum of Art. So stay tuned. I'm really excited to see those both. Dr. Myra Brown-Green is an art historian, author, arts consultant, lecturer, and independent curator. Raised in Cambridge, Mass., her love of the arts began as a child while spending countless hours creating at the Community Art Center and the housing complex where she lived, and frequent excursions to local arts institutions. Dr. Myra moved to Brooklyn to attend Pratt Institute, later receiving her PhD in interdisciplinary studies with a focus in world symbols. She is also a professional quilter with over 30 years of experience quilting and teaching textile arts. Her quilts are held in numerous collections, including the Smithsonian's Anacostia Museum in DC and Michigan State University. Over the past 10 years, she has devoted much of her time to assisting artists of color to document and archive their work and collections. And it's now my pleasure to invite Bisa to take the virtual floor.
Thank you so much, Persephone. And hello to everybody out there. I am so pleased to be with you today. Thank you for joining us, and a special thank you to my dear friend Myra for being here. I wanted to start by talking to you all about my work before I actually started quilting, and then just take you through a brief sequence of my work from the beginning, and then until what I'm doing right now. Actually, behind me is a piece of artwork that is brand new and it's not quite sewn yet. This is my design wall. But the very first piece I want to show you today is a piece that I did while I was at college. Persephone mentioned my time at Howard University. And while I was at Howard, I was a painting major. I have a degree in fine arts. And for those of you who don't know about Howard University, it's historically Black. It's in Washington, D.C. And my professors primarily were from this group called AfriCobra, especially the painting professors. So I have like a little pamphlet from the AfriCobra booklet. And you can even see the vibrant colors right on here, the orange and the pink. But AfriCobra has a specific philosophy, and you see that in my work in the past, and you'll see that in my work now. Their philosophy was to use a total, create an African American aesthetic. You had African art, and they have their aesthetic. You have the American art scene, you have the Beaux-Arts art scene in Europe, but in the United States, we were still, and they were really focused on formulating a new aesthetic where you use bright, vibrant colors inspired by Africa, portray African people, show people with pride and dignity. And then the main thing was like educating your people, making sure every time somebody looks at your artwork that they feel proud and they feel dignified and they understand that this art is for them. So the art a lot of times would be murals and it would be sold as inexpensive prints, so that art could be for everybody and not just a select few academics or very rich people. And the next slide I want to show you is what I was doing in grad school. So Persephone mentioned I went to Montclair State for my master's in teaching. And the good thing about Montclair State was that their teaching program, they insisted that you had certain foundation courses. And one of the foundation courses that I didn't get at Howard was fibers. So although I had started gluing fabric on boards when I was in the painting program, I couldn't just fully switch over to fabric. And even though I tried and there was some serious resistance, but these are two pieces that I did in grad school. The first one on the left is an imagined picture of what I thought my grandfather, my father's father, who's from Ghana, would look like. And northern Ghana, it's a little bit cooler because you're moving away from the coast. And the types of cloth that they use, the hand-dyed cloths tend to be more natural fibers, deep navies, black, beige, and even the deep forest green. And I actually used my father's dashikis from the 60s and the 70s to create the portrait of my grandfather. And I want to mention that I never saw my grandfather. I just looked up a photo of an elderly man from northern Ghana. And so on the left is my first exploration in making a quilt, making a portrait out of the fabric that people actually wear. And then if you look on the right, I did the same, I was using the same photographic reference, but it's a year later. And you can see how the face structure has changed. I'm becoming more comfortable with cutting. I'm becoming more secure in my fabric choices. You can even see that the contrast, the very light on his beard and the white on the furrow of his brow really contrasts with that black deep in the hollows of his cheeks. So I'm learning how to use fabric as a tool, and I'm using what I did in painting by layering and using contrast, but instead of using paints and glazes, I'm using fabric. So I'm directly translating one medium into another. And I want to say that at this time, this was around year 2000, I was using fabric from my family members to portray family members, whether they were my imagined image of them or what they actually look like. And in my next slide, you're going to see me moving that dialogue or moving that expression forward. These are my mother's parents. My mother was from New Orleans, Louisiana, and so was her mother, and so her mother's mother. So I have two sides: the Ghanaian side of my family, who had been there since as far back as we can remember, maybe even before Ghana was a country itself, back in the kingdoms of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. And my mother's side, they're from Louisiana, and they had been and still are down there, but since the 1700s, we have records of a relative landing, an African person landing in New Orleans and was enslaved by a particular family. And they were the Blacks, and they were also the Louisiana Creoles, which is like a mixed race people. And my grandmother is there with her brand new husband. This is their wedding day. I think the date, and I hate to mess this up, but somewhere around 1930, Louisiana, New Orleans, Louisiana. And I'm still using fabric to tell about a story. My grandmother was Catholic. She was born and raised in Louisiana. So I used a lot of lace, although you can't see the resolution as well. Oh, hey, New Orleans. I used all different types of lace, as in hand knitted lace, machine lace, but I was trying to talk about her gentleness, her delicacy, her softness, and she was that old-fashioned type of woman, very proper. And my grandfather, on the other hand, worked for the Foreign Services and was a diplomat in Morocco in the 50s. So I wanted to use African print on his fabric, on his to illustrate his clothing. I used African fabric. And if you go to the next slide, you can see how I'm moving forward now. This I did somewhere around 2017. And this is one of my very dear friends. Her name is Fiona. She's an adult. She's a nurse. She's a mother, a wife and a mother of 5. She has a brand new little grandbaby. I think the grandbaby just turned 1. But this is Fiona in Jamaica as a child. And then my version on the right, I'm really using color now in a more informed way, I should say. And I'm being more true to myself, because the Afro-Coba roots are still in me. I'm drawn to the vibrancy of African cloth. So now I'm using those same colors that are in her cloth. You can see that on her dress. And then you see those colors in herself. And I like using duality of light and dark, even on her face. Although I'm using deep electric blue and cobalts, I'm still using vibrant blues. And on the other side of her face, using those warm colors, red, fuchsia, orange, pink. I want to talk about light and dark in the African American community, and how there seems to be like this push and pull, how much white is in your blood, how much closer were you in the times of slavery. You might have actually been a relative of the slave masters and the enslavers. And so you would have been treated better. And so that trickles all the way down to now, that even in society, we still are in this struggle about who is lighter and then so-called better. So I like to confuse that with my images. And I'm also talking about her mood. This is a young child who has a very serious expression on her face, because she's getting ready to leave her home, her warm and beautiful land of Jamaica, to go to New Jersey, where she was going to be treated quite differently. I mean, little American school children are not particularly happy or pleased to find a student who has an accent, a student who's from a Black country. As I was growing up, my father being from Ghana, I was called all sorts of bad names from, or being asked, did I wear shoes, and did I used to swing on trees as a child? So I have this, I'm trying to talk about my friend's background, but I'm also talking about mine, the child of an immigrant who's also simultaneously the child of an American. And if you look at the next slide, I will show you where I'm at now. So this photo is very important to me. It's Easter Sunday, 1940. It was taken in Chicago by a photographer named Russell Lee. And this marks a transition in my expression as an artist. Because prior to this, I was always doing family photos, my children, my friends' friends. And so now I'm using the broader Black diaspora, African diaspora, to talk about bigger subjects. And by this time, I'm starting to work with the Claire Oliver Gallery. This is I guess it's almost about my 4th year now. And this photo is important because I found this Easter Sunday, 1940, but I couldn't find any information on who these children were, except for the young man in the center. Um, and his name was Spencer Reedus. And he was the only one who's been identified to date. 1940, it's not, or excuse me, the license plate says 1941. 1941, it's not long ago enough that we can't know who these children were. And why is it that there are so many photos online that are just unidentified? We're often thought as African Americans as subjects, but what about what we want to say about ourselves? And if you look at the next slide, you'll see my version of this photo. I made a quilt, and I want to say that this was life size. So like the one behind me, it's huge. Well, huge to me is like 10 feet. And I wanted to use the vibrant colors to talk about the moods of the little boy. You know, the little boy with his hand on his head, on his jaw like that. He's like bored. He's kind of blue. Maybe he's over the whole thing. But I love that each of them had such meticulous clothing. Their parents loved them. They took care of them. Even their shoes are clean. So, which is why I made sure that I showed the bottom of their shoes being clean like that. And it's hard to tell on here, but some of the little boys have bicycles and different things and the African prints on their clothing to talk about the things that they like. And if we look at the next slide, I can show you what I'm working on a lot more recently. So this is just close up. I wanted you to see that each part of their faces are fabric. There's layers of silk, cotton, netting, lace, whatever I can use to show the tones and the lights and the darks in the skin, but translating it into bright and vibrant colors in each face. I haven't even counted, but one time I got close to like 150 and then I just stopped counting. And they're also quilted, and it's applique layered on and then quilted through and through. And then I'd like you to see another piece here. There should be, okay, this is more recently. This young man, it's called It's a New Dawn, It's a New Day, a New Life for Me. That's a line from a Nina Simone song. But I found a photo of a little boy, and this boy is from the rural South, 1940s. Again, he didn't have shoes. He had some worn overalls, and he had such a manly look on this little young face. I'm using fabric now in even more to tell the story. The background behind him is a fabric called Speed Bird. And Speed Bird is a fabric that talks about economic prosperity and moving forward and advancing in life. So I'm thinking of free as a bird. I'm thinking of the Speed Bird itself, prosperity, but he's a child in the 40s. That means he'll be an adult in the 60s. It's wartime. Like I got these photos from the database taken during World War II. So he's seeing jet planes flying overhead for the first time. On his overalls, you'll see the jet planes. That's what he sees. His feet are firmly grounded in the South and in this rural atmosphere. So I put a horse on his shirt. These are the things that he sees. On his sleeve, there's an open book, and there's even the 1, 2, 3s and the ABCs, because this is a child, he wants to learn. I even put a little motorcycle on his front pocket because I thought about what are the things that I can give this child. Now when I'm working, it becomes a conversation of what I can give back to these people. I want to make a portrait of them, and I want to do something that should have been done in the first place. And I want to show you another piece before my time is almost up. This couple is, I call them the broom jumpers, and I want to talk about the African American community and how we do value family. We do value marriage. Like that's my overarching message. We are just like everybody else. Black lives do matter. We have family, we have children, we have love, we have hope, we have dreams. And each of their fabrics on them are talking about that thing. She's holding a little purse that's cut off of a piece of African fabric called Michelle Obama's purse. And I chose that deliberately because Michelle Obama is the future. So I want to talk about them in the past. We in the present are looking at it, but even their future and even our own future aspirations. that we all may want love and companionship. And if I'm not out of time, I would just like you to see this photo of Morris Brown baseball team taken in 1899. And if you could go to the next slide, just so you could see my version of this photo. This is my largest quilt to date. It was purchased by the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, and it's hanging at the Katona Museum in New York right now. It's 10 feet by 12 feet. And I want each young man to be looked at so that you can see that they each have personalities. We're not monoliths. Somebody's a leader, somebody's a class clown, somebody's a sensitive one. And I want you all to see that the fabric on them is called I Run Faster Than My Enemies. It's horses, but in Africa, that means that you are gonna succeed over your enemies. And I think these men, they did indeed succeed over their enemies because they're here being presented in front of all you all today. And I think this is a family piece called Kindred, but I think I might be out. So maybe we can refer back to these. I want to make sure that Myra has enough time to talk about her beautiful work. I think you're all going to be very happy with that.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you, Bisa.
No problem, Myra.
Quilt making has taken me in a completely different direction. I realized that although I love exhibiting my work, it has never been about exhibiting for me. The quilts became an interpretation of my historical research. This is called Cometic Paradise. It's the first quilt that I ever exhibited. It was exhibited in the Joining Forces exhibition that Dr. Carolyn Mazlumi curated. And I was just getting into my, delving deeper in my research in grad school, the presence of African symbols in Western art. Because I have loved and worked with textiles all of my life, I knew that I wanted to use quilts as the vehicle for my research. Over time, I made a commitment to master as many quilt techniques as possible so that I could eventually teach the techniques and be available to critique quilts made by artists who wanted to perfect their work. To keep me centered during this time, I was so blessed to have so many wonderful masters, both quilters and historians, where I actually could just call up whenever I needed to. And in the African tradition, we call their names, and I just want to say Marie Wilson, Questa Bembury, Roland Freeman, Gladys Marie Fry, Raymond Dobard, Robert Ferris Thompson, and of course, Dr. Carolyn Mazlumi, who I speak to probably twice, sometimes 3 times a week. This is called In My Aquaba Form. At this point, I had started getting deeper into foundation piecing. The 2 areas that I focus most on, or the 2 techniques, would be surface design, which would be machine quilting, and foundation piecing, free motion quilting and foundation piecing. I foundation pieced all of the flying geese. So if you look at this piece, the flying geese are going in different directions, and the Aquaba symbol is hand appliqued. Aquaba tells the Aquaba symbol tells the story of Akua, who was of the Ashanti people of Ghana. Her and her husband were having a challenging time having a baby, and they hear about this doctor who lives far away. They go to visit him, and he prescribes an Aquaba symbol for them. Usually they're made out of wood. And to this day, they're a symbol of fertility, and I love them. I collect them. And so if for those of you who are familiar with flying geese, it's a symbol of a bird as well. So they look like they're flying in different directions. And I wanted to make sure that these geese were going in a variety of directions. The Aquaba symbol is an intercessor that works between the mother and father who will finally give birth to a baby. Next quilt, please. By this time, I had really gotten into foundation piecing, which is a pretty old technique. It is where you can use paper or fabric, and you apply cloth on top of that particular on a particular piece of foundation something, and so it allows you to use very, very tiny pieces of cloth. It came about many years ago, after clothing may have been made and there were scraps, and so not to throw them away, these particular pieces were used. So by this time, this happens to be about a twin size quilt. And by this time I was foundation piecing large pieces. So this particular spirit is mask or spirit is foundation pieced. And so I was testing myself. And I love foundation piecing so much that I decided to write a book about it. Next slide, please. It's called Piece Symbols. It was written in 2009. And by this time, I was delving deeper into my studies, and I was looking at symbols from all of the continents. And so this book includes symbols from 6 of the continents. And one of the things that I put a call out to quilters around the world and asked them if they would be interested in creating a quilt using one of my symbols. And in the book, I have a quilt that a quilter in Israel made. So that was really fascinating for me. And so, and I know today there's so many people. I saw folks from Australia and Barcelona on this webinar. So it just tells you how quilters come out from everywhere to support. Next slide, please. Many of you may have this book. It's a phenomenal book written by Spike Gillespie, and I'm showing this because I was asked to design 20 of the blocks that went with the book and patterns for the blocks based on 20 of the cultures that I were to choose. And at that point, I was trying to not just look at the African symbol, but look at how the African symbol related to symbols from around the world. And so when I was choosing the 20 images, I forced myself to choose symbols that or images or places that I really was not completely familiar with, so that I could definitely learn more about them. And I remember sitting in an Asian restaurant having lunch by myself, and I was looking at the wall, and there was a phenomenal symbol up there. And I remember taking out a pen and a piece of paper to write on, and started sketching the symbol that eventually became a block in the book. Next slide, please. And so you can see some of the symbols here. And the one that is in the lower left-hand corner is from that particular screen that was in the restaurant. Next slide. Next slide. So I worked with the City College of New York. They knew that I quilted and that I designed quilts, and they asked me if I would consider creating 14 double-sided banners that were 60 inches by 72 inches. And of course, by this time, I did have my PhD, and I was still looking into symbolism, getting deeper into symbolism, of course. And anything that I did, I wanted to add some symbolism in it so that it can be also a discussion piece. And so I designed these 14 banners. They hadn't had banners per se. The original banners that they had taken them down because they were from the beginning of the institution, and so this was really the next phase that they wanted to put some banners up. They had a new president, and they wanted to do something different. And because the Great Hall is a historic place at City College, they wanted these banners there. So I designed them. I did a lot of research on City College. And if you look at the piece that's fourth in from the left, it's a colorful piece with green and red and orange. There's a Sankofa symbol and a fleur-de-lis symbol. We're going to talk about the Sankofa symbol when we get to the images from the museum, but I wanted to just mention, to give you an example of how I work. I chose the fleur-de-lis symbol. Fleur-de-lis is a French symbol of kingship, queenship from France. And the reason why I chose that as the symbol for City College is that City College is the flagship school for all CUNYs. So when you read each of these particular banners, there's something about City College that it can be translated from the symbols or the quilt patterns that are in these particular banners. Next, please. Then I started curating. And I would curate a number of exhibitions at the college, and I founded their first community art gallery a few years ago. And this particular exhibition was done it was a tribute to Faith Ringgold. And I was able to bring in from all over the country quilters to create quilts in her honor, and which was a wonderful weekend. And as a matter of fact, if you look on the right side of this poster, there's a little girl with a yellow dress, and Bisa happened to do that particular quilt, which is, I love that quilt.
Me too.
I know, she's so special. Yeah, so I curate now. I curate not only quilters' works, but I curate I curate photographers' works and mixed media. I have a folk artist, and I've started representing artists. And like I have a folk artist, Carl McIntosh, who is a phenomenal folk artist. Dr. Mazlumi is one of my clients now, which I'm so proud to have. Next slide, please. And then this is one of my pride and joys. It's a bestseller. It's an award-winning book that I published, that was published. It came out in 2018. It's called Brooklyn on My Mind, Black Visual Artists from the WPA to the Present. So in addition to my love of quilts, I put together a book. It was only supposed to be 100 artists in the book for the first book. And it ended up being, there's 129 artists from the WPA to the present. And it's such a beautiful coffee table book. It won a Bronze Independent Book Award. And now I'm back into the quilt, and this has art, all kinds of mediums, painting, photography, sculpture, and but now I'm working on finishing a book on the African presence in North American quilts. So I'm really excited about that. And I think this is the last slide. Yes? So Miss Bisa, now I get to talk to you. I get to talk to you. But I want to tell folks how we met. So I get this call. I get this call from Dr. Mazlumi many years ago, many years ago, when she says, this young woman called me, sent me some of her images. She's a phenomenal artist, and she wants to get more connected with the Black quilt movement. And I told her, you live in Brooklyn and you have a space there, and she says, I want you to look out for her. And we've been looking out for Bisa ever since. Ever since.
Yeah, I remember that so well.
Yeah.
I remember being like this, I was just sort of, you know, trying to find my way. That's when I did those images of my grandparents, and I reached out. I remember being really intimidated to call you, first of all. Because, I mean, you have a long title, Myra. It's like Dr. Myra Brown Green. Is that it? Or did I miss a...
Blue, red? No. Yes.
I just remember being like, wow, but you all were so inviting.
You were just so loving. Oh my goodness.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm telling you, and we've been in touch ever since. I check on you, sure you're eating.
Yes. Yes.
I do.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes. So how does art build community and connections across generations? Let's look at that.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me of, just like, as you said, especially quilting. Like, if we talk about it like that, our medium started out communally in the first place, especially with African American women. It was always the quilt circle. And when I reached out to you all, you invited me over, you critiqued my work, like, honestly and fairly, you know, and actually gave me tips that I use to this day. I remember you looking at my work and saying, like, you need to use more contrast. I don't know if you remember that, but, and you also had suggested like a book. I forget what book it was. It was by, like, I think it was a Dutch guy or Austrian, but I don't know. It was about the color wheel. And I feel like our form of art as people of the African descent has always been like art as a utilitarian object. And then there's always been this continuum of teaching the next one who comes under you. And I feel like quilters still hold on to that. Like, we're always teaching and helping each other.
Yeah, and you know, I always, as far, and I probably can picture myself talking about contrast, because I think quilters get caught up believing that things are supposed to match when you're quilting. But quilting is about contrast. And I think that's why I have used it so much as a tool, and it actually met my degree. So for example, my degree is in interdisciplinary studies, and I feel that quilting is such an interdisciplinary art because of the pieces that are used in the amount of pieces. I mean, I've used
Right.
hundreds, like in a trip, I've done a trip around the world quilt, and used thousands of little 1-inch squares and wanted to make them different, you know, each one a different color. So I get what you're saying when you talked about using 150 pieces and counting in one lip.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
which makes sense. Do you
Hmm.
feel there's a sense of responsibility to address the past, and how does your work do that?
Oh, for sure. I mean, now more than ever, right? Although saying now more than ever is like saying that Black people are just now having a crisis,
Hmm.
when we have, since we landed on this continent. But I think that there is a responsibility as artists, because you were bombarded constantly with TV and movies and commercials and the internet of negative things, where somebody did sit around in a big table and they discussed what this was going to do to people viewing it, and what they could make us do or convince us to buy or spend. And artists, we have the power to change some of that and say what we want to say. Like, I always want to make sure that I am doing right by the people. And when I mean the people, I mean Black people and all people. Somebody had asked me the other day, like, did I feel like I was a historian? And I was saying, like, thinking to myself, not really. I feel like what I know is the basic knowledge that people should know. And there's just a lot of correcting to do. I'm like, it's no slant on anybody, but like, as an artist, we got a tool, right? Every people can look at our work and they're going to get something of it, and I would like them to get something positive from it. Like, I did a piece of Frederick Douglass that we kind of like just went over really quickly. I wonder if within the slides, is it possible that we could get the Frederick Douglass piece on the screen?
So while they're getting that, yeah, we can
Yeah.
keep talking.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this idea of what we're going through. Actually, I started the Frederick Douglass piece before Corona and all that, but I'm always interested in looking at the past. And when I found this image of Frederick Douglass, I saw him as a young man. And I'm so used to seeing Frederick Douglass with the gray hair and the fro. And I saw him with this silk cravat and this like brocade vest. And I was like, oh, hold up, wait a minute. Like, there's clearly a Frederick Douglass that I haven't been introduced to. And it made me have to re-educate myself. And I read his speech from the 4th of July. And just the quote on the screen, you know, it's not the light that we need, but fire. It's not the gentle shower, but the thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. And that was actually the name of my exhibit in Harlem that opened in February. So this is before George Floyd, before this racial reckoning, before Corona. But Frederick Douglass already said that in 1854. Like, how do you get rid of racism? We need the whole storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. So I feel like art must inform us. We have the tool. We have to go back to the past because the tools are there for us. We just have to use them.
Yeah, and I think I also think that we cannot, as as people of color in particular, um, get caught up in feeling inferior,
Mhm.
um, and feeling and just and one of the pieces that you created of the 5 boys, um, I don't know if we can bring that up, but the five young men, to someone who is just looking at that piece and loving what you did with it, they can assume that you dressed those children up. But these are
Mhm.
children who had some sort of affluence. These were
Oh yeah.
children, you know, this was a community.
Mhm.
My parents are from Farmville, Virginia, and
Mhm.
during the early days, Black folks were called Mr. and Miss in that town by everyone. And I
Wow.
believe Douglas lived there as well. My parents were two of the students who walked out of Morton High School, and
Mhm.
which was listed in Brown versus the Board of Education.
Mhm.
I remember my mother even singing the French national anthem, because
Right.
during that time there was the Black intelligentsia. And
Oh.
so people, you know, even in the 20s, Black folks were going to college and coming back and teaching the people that they left.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
how can we confront problematic histories with art? This, it's a two-part question. And
Sure.
and what do we do when art itself is the issue? So how can we confront
How
problematic
can we confront?
pro-
I mean,
problematic histories with art?
yeah, yeah,
Address that first.
yeah. I think it's a really smart thing to confront problematic histories by telling the truth. You know, I really like when, well, I'm glad that a lot of the Confederate statues are coming down, but how to deal with that? I mean, there's museums of the Confederacy that exist, or the Daughters of the Revolution. You know, those pieces could be housed there. But I really like when Kehinde Wiley did the Rumors of War, and how it was in Times Square, and then now it's in Virginia, right? I think it's in Virginia. And so by replacing things that are problematic with things that represent us now, especially because a lot of those old statues, they weren't even made in the Civil War. You know, some of them are made in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, well after those people were long gone, everyone who would have actually been in the war. So that those statues represented what the people wanted in the 30s and 40s, and whatever illusions or stories that they would like to tell about these Confederate generals. And so it's time that Black people are treated as equals and on all people, and that we can set the story straight, replace them if necessary. I think that's excellent.
Yeah, I mean, as an art historian, as an historian,
Yes.
um, I hear what you're saying. I don't feel that, I mean, I still feel that they should be documented, because
Mhm.
they were a part of history. And in order for our grandchildren and great great grandchildren to know from where we came, there has to be some documentation. As far as
Mhm.
what do we do when art itself is the issue, um, I mean, we can make a transition. For example, um, Dr. Mazlumi is going to be blanketing um, the town and the area where George Floyd um, was assassinated. And
Mhm.
um, and so with quilts, and
Mhm.
there's and a lot of the um, galleries and the textile museum has signed on to have these quilts there. So that's going to be a
That's
big,
wonderful.
yeah, it's a wonderful
Yeah.
thing. I mean,
Yeah.
doing the masks when Women of Color Quilters Network had
Mhm.
the mask contest, or when people were creating masks,
Right.
and many of the members made hundreds of and thousands of masks to give away to the people in the communities. So
It's so generous.
yeah, so you know, those kinds of things are really really important.
Yeah.
How does your work engage with past and present activism and movements for racial justice? And I think we touched on that, but
Yeah.
maybe you can compare a couple of your pieces.
Well, for instance, there's a piece that I made called Kindred, and it's of a family. And when I first set out to do that piece, I was thinking originally, like I did before, like, I'm just going to do a portrait of a family, right? But then it became a form of activism. And if maybe if we could bring that up on the screen too. It's the quilt with the
Father
stripes
and the
and the
father.
family, but it became an active form of positivity by the original photograph. The source photo was the mother and her two daughters, and that was fine. The caption of the photo said, "Father makes $1.25 a week at a
Mhm.
turpentine factory," but he wasn't pictured. And the thing that made it active was that I decided I wanted the father to be in the picture. I mean, I have a friend who just asked me point blank. She wasn't trying to be racist, but this is what she had read somewhere. She said, "Why are 90% of Black children born out of wedlock? What's going on in the Black community?" And without realizing, like, how would it even be possible for whoever to research that to interview every family to get to this 90%? Like, how did you make that? And what is your intention by making that type of study? Instead of talking about how the United States, less people are getting married and more children are being born out of wedlock, you're trying to single out this one group. So I added the father in to say, like, we care about family. This father wasn't pictured, but he's supporting his entire family. And he literally has his feet on the ground, and the mother and the two daughters are being held up by him. So it's a story of him, and it's again a story of me, because my parents divorced, and me and my siblings lived with my father because he was more financially able at that time. And I want to talk about Black fathers being a part of the community, being a part of our lives. And that becomes a form of activism. I mean, my Instagram has gotten a lot more, I'm being more specific about using quotes from the philosophers and using quotes from the speeches to say what I want to say, because it's one thing for me to say family is important to us, but it's a whole nother thing for me to add in what what uh, what Gwendolyn Brooks said about family, or Maya Angelou said about family, or James Baldwin. I want to use those voices from our elders from the past, but they're so present, to say exactly what the root of the matter is.
Thank you. So
Yeah,
the last question, and I was thinking about this, and I'm going to ask it
sure.
for both of us.
Yes.
I'm going to say, how does our work suggest or envision a new future looking beyond the past? And for me, what I've been doing for the past decade is archiving the work of people of color, Black people in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And this is important. I remember when I was working on Brooklyn on My Mind, I was looking for a specific artist, and I could not find him. And I knew he had to be in the book. I mean, it was important
Mm-hmm.
because he was a part of the Brooklyn history and the Brooklyn art scene, which is a part of the world art scene.
Yeah.
So I went online looking for him. There was nothing about him. Then I said, well, maybe he had a manager or an agent of some sort. I found an agent, but she had transitioned. So I remember that night sitting on my bed, on the side of my bed, and I just started to bawl, to cry.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I said, this cannot happen. So um, it's for me, um, the new future would be making sure that everybody, as many folks as possible, um, should be archived, should be put down on some sort of document. That's why I'm so
Mm-hmm.
grateful that when I asked Kehinde Wiley to be in my book, he said
Mm-hmm.
yes. When I asked Melvin Edwards to be in my book, he said yes. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there were so many people. I was able to get Jacob Lawrence's work in my book. Even though,
Amazing.
I mean, just so many of these artists that are my granddaughter and my grandson and their children should know.
Yes.
And a lot of times, um, elders don't want the next generation to take the next step with what it is that they're
Yeah.
doing. So for me, I've set this book up so that a researcher from somewhere else will have shoulders to actually stand on and take it to the next place. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, that's what it's supposed to be about. So how are you um, setting things up for the future?
I mean, I am so in line with you, Myra. Like I feel like you're doing it with your quilts and your books and your project managing, but I'm doing the same thing with my quilts, you know,
Mhm.
making sure when I see children walking through an exhibit, the museum in Katona got to me recently and said a father was walking around with his daughter, a black father, and he was explaining the images to her. And they had got to a piece that I did of the four little girls who died in the church. September 15th, 1963, the church bombing. And so if you had never heard of those children and didn't know what happened, that at least now there's something that sparks the question. And then that can be answered for children. And long after you and I, and we're all gone, like these pieces, museums have bought them. So the record will be there that this happened and this artist deemed that it was important. And our documents are right there up on the wall.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and you know, I try to get artists to also, and this is one of the things that I've been working on is getting artists to write me a letter saying, you get to, um, you get to put my work in your books, um, you know, even after I'm gone, you know,
Right.
and
That's
pass
great.
and pass it, you know, and pass it on because
Mhm.
documentation is so so important.
Mhm.
There's an artist in my book who someone said, "Do you have him in the book? He's a Brooklyn boy. He needs to be in this book. He's important. He's important. He's
Mhm.
dying though, and
Mm.
he doesn't want any of his collectors to see the way he looks and so
Okay.
but I'm going to call him and see if he'll see you." And so he asked to see me he lived in Harlem. He asked to see me the next day.
That's
And went
beautiful.
up there and you know, she says, "Do you want me to come with you?" I said, "No, I'm good." So I go up there. His home had been turned into a hospice and
Wow.
supposedly his home attendant would be there. When I
Mhm.
ring the doorbell, he answers the door. He answered the door because he knew I was coming.
Incredible.
He sent his
Yeah.
attendant to go get him some coffee that he loved. And
You
we sat
see,
together. He had his oxygen tank. We sat together for 3 hours. He
I
fussed
love
with
that.
me because he said, "You were talking too fast and I need to catch my breath." And
Yeah.
I got him to sign the documents. I got him, you know, we picked images that would go in the book, and
That's
he
wonderful.
transitioned like 2 weeks later. You know?
Amazing.
So, but it's so important for us.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I think we should look at some of our favorite pieces that's
Yes.
in the museum. It's time.
I would love to. And I would love to talk about actually a piece of artwork that is in the American Folk Art Museum's collection. And it actually was made by my uncle, Kevin
The
Sampson.
next slide, please.
Yeah, so if we could look at Kevin Sampson's piece. Well, I want to say that
Thank
we
you.
have a strong, I talked to Uncle Kevin the other day, and he was just talking about his strong religious background, that his father was a civil rights leader. He himself spent many years as a police officer, and now he's been an artist for more than I think it's 30 years now. I mean, professionally an artist and just an artist for the past 30 years. And this piece just struck me, right? Me, you, both of us liked this mother figure, Mother Oatman.
Mhm.
And I I was like looking at those big strong arms, right? And that chest that looks like, is it a treasure chest? I wasn't sure. And so that's what really drew me into this piece. And he did say that Mother Oatman was somebody in his church, his best friend's mother,
Yes.
or was it the grandmother?
Um,
I think it was the best friend's mother.
yeah, I believe.
No, it was the grandmother. It was the grandmother, because the grandmother was the one who led these prayer meetings, and she was always cooking, and she was that stern but also very loving and protective figure. So I thought that,
Yeah, and for people that don't know Kevin's work, I mean, I was
yeah.
blessed to be able to work with him on a public art installation in Jersey for about 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the piece, it has you see some. It looks almost like driftwood that's holding
Yes.
the piece out up. And he he makes boats as well. Kevin, and our connection was a woman who worked with my husband and I in Brooklyn named Kia, who made an
Mm-hmm.
ark in Jersey, in Newark, that
Mm-hmm.
they ended up getting rid of. And um and so once we realized that, that was, he mentioned Kia, and I'm like, I think I know who you're talking about. And so this piece, even though he says that he wanted to make it, he wanted it to appear Asian, it reminds
Yes.
me almost of a protector symbol, an African
Yeah.
protector symbol, and the arms
Mm-hmm.
are not covering any part of the body. And
Mm-hmm.
it's almost saying, like, when you see those, and I'm sorry we don't have an image of one of the protector symbols that usually has a mirror in the belly, um,
Oh,
and nails, and
yes.
it's almost, she's almost saying, like, come with what you got.
That's what
Nothing's
she
gonna
does.
nothing's gonna hurt me. And I think this woman
Right.
she was pretty tough. She was a
Yeah.
jokester, he said.
Hmm.
She would tease them. And yes, the Nkisi,
Yes,
thank
the
you.
Congo.
From the Congo.
Yeah.
Yes, thank
Hmm.
you. So next slide. And this was one of your favorites.
Yes. Well, I love this one because that contrast. I mean, that's that law of like the opposites, bright, dull, light, dark. Um, this artist, Sarah Mary Taylor, I'm so interested in how she's using that. And then when I looked her up more, I saw that she did that deliberately, but you can see that it's deliberate. And I like the arms, like, she's like Mr. Fletcher. I wasn't able to find out who Mr. Fletcher was, but they're standing in the same way like Mother Oatman was. So I
Yeah,
don't know if Mr. Fletcher was a protective figure or not, but if she honored him with a piece, I would think this is somebody, if you're going to spend that much time making a quilt and name it after somebody, usually it's somebody you admire, that you care about. So I don't know if you would make a quilt of somebody who you feared or despised, you know?
yeah, I love it. And I love that I love that they have no necks, really.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I love that she puts her name and she makes her name out of fabric, which is that
right.
she signs the piece
That's
in
beautiful.
fabric, which is special to me. So,
Hmm.
and it has all the
Hmm.
components. It has the border, it has
Yes, it does.
sashing,
Yeah.
quilt has sashing, it has border. Um, Next slide, please. This is one of my
Oh,
favorites. Yes, the
yeah.
hen.
You want to talk about it first?
Well, the hen's quilt. What I love about hens or guinea hens or birds, very important to African culture. And I thought this was I thought it was so interesting that and I'm not surprised that
Mm-hmm.
Mississippi, someone in Mississippi would be, would possibly, I don't know if it's subconsciously or if it's
Mm-hmm.
purposefully, because they were raising um, hens or chickens there, but the connection between Ghana, the Sankofa symbol, which is, you know, it reminds me of that, where the Sankofa is the bird looking back, although these are not, but the bird looking back at its tail to let us know, to, you know, as a symbol, the Adinkra symbol, as a symbol saying, in order for you to know where you're going, you have to know from where you've come. And then we can look at
Yes.
the Yoruba culture, where it can be an offering to Shango. Shango, the bird, the guinea hen, is a
Mm-hmm.
Shango symbol, and Shango's colors are red and white, and there's a lot of red and almost white in this. So I thought this was, and I love the
Yes.
strategy scene. But then you see that there's a border, which it's just, I just love it. It's magnificent.
Yeah. I loved it too. I loved I'm always into the story, right? I'm always talking about the stories, but I loved hearing that, reading up on Pearlie Posey, and that her mother passed away when she was 5,
Hmm.
and she was only able to do the quilt tops, and that her grandmother was the one who finished them. But the mother knew that she was going to pass, and so she wanted to have these things to keep her child warm. And it really like related to me a lot because my mother passed when I was fairly young, but in my 20s, and she was always making clothing. She and my grandmother making all these clothes and saving all these scraps. And when I started making quilts, my mother like opened up her bins and just gave me all this fabric. I remember her reaching down and just giving me like silk and lace. So she's giving me all her dressmaker's fabric for me to make quilts with. And to this date, those are still what I'm using. So I like the idea of the grandmother and the mother passing this legacy on. And I felt like even though my quilts and Pearlie Posey's quilts look very different, and Sarah Mary quilts look very different, that we have that in common of that mother, grandmother legacy. And I'm giving you the tools in which you can make your living from. And
Hmm.
both of them, they had their quilts they got to exhibit in museums before they passed. So they got to benefit from the fruits of their labor. You give it to family members, but they also got, outside people to give them money and help them in their lives through their artwork.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah,
Next
yeah.
slide, please. And that's a detail.
Uh, mm-hmm. Oh, the
Yeah,
strip quilt.
yeah, the strip quilts. You know what this
Yes,
reminds me of?
yes,
Kente
I
cloth.
do.
Kente cloth. I love
Yes,
this piece. This is one of my
yeah,
favorites. And I've always loved this piece, as long as I've seen it. And I've seen it
yeah,
show up in different publications and different
yes,
places. I love the use of the stripes,
yes.
and I love that movement, and
Mm-hmm.
the way that they're placed is the direction that she wanted our eyes to go. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
not. Maybe she just felt like putting it that way because she had cut pieces. You know, how many times do you cut? Have you ever cut a piece of fabric and you don't want to throw it out, or you
Yeah,
don't want to not use it in the piece, and
yeah.
you just put it this way? I'm sure a lot of quilters do
Right.
that. Um,
Yeah.
so I love that. I think we have an image of Kente cloth.
Oh yeah, I forgot. I did want to talk about that too. But go ahead, Myra, if you want to talk about Kente, and then I'll talk
Well, I
about
want
my.
to show it with the Kente, but let's talk. Go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, here it
Yeah.
is. We'll go back.
Okay.
So you can see, I
Go
just
ahead.
wanted the public to see the Kente
Mhm.
next to it.
Mhm.
Just Kente is a royal cloth, definitely. It's usually,
Ghana.
it's woven and it's from Ghana. It's woven in strips. You know, and it's usually woven by men. There was an elder, and I wish I could remember her name, who lived in Queens here, who used to go to Ghana, and she would learn how she was a female person. She made
Wow.
kente cloth. I can't remember her name, and but it's so expensive. The traditional kente cloth is so expensive because and it comes in the sizes that it comes in would be like a queen size or a full size, and it's usually there's the threads that were used in many instances were silk,
Right.
so that's why it was so expensive. So when you saw kente, you thought of royalty as well. So we can look at your piece, Bisa.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about that idea of the stripes and the strips, because my piece, this is the piece that I did talking about family. But my background, sometimes like people ask me like, why did you choose that background? The background is sort of like the set. And then the figures are the actors in this play or the story that I want to tell.
Nice.
And those stripes, although that fabric was domestic, made in the USA, but I stitched it deliberately. It's kind of hard to see, but you can see some of the like the vertical and the horizontal stripes, and in some of them there's actually zigzags and triangles. But I'm trying to deliberately imitate that idea of like kente strips, even though this is an American family, they're of African roots. So I want people to always be able to like know that these people have history. You know, they might have been in the Mississippi Delta, but they didn't just spring out of the ground in the Mississippi Delta, and their story didn't start in slavery. It started, you know, hundreds and thousands of years before that. And I really like the strip quilt next to mine because you can see like the echoes, the using of different textures of fabric, the use of the stripes, the use, even the way she quilted hers is similar to the way that I quilted mine, and yet I didn't see hers before I made that. But I love that, like that connection.
Yeah. So we're going to look at one last piece, and then we're going to open it up for a few questions. This is a self-portrait of Sister Gertrude Morgan, and we were talking about this lovely piece. She was a very spiritual woman. She was a church lady. She may have been an usher. She might have been a nurse. She's wearing all white, which puts her next to the infinite one, whatever you call God, or but the divine source. What I love about this piece is that instead of her painting the background in a sky, because you look at in a sky blue, it's orange. And I was talking to Bisa the other day, and I was talking about the colors of the days, the Egyptian, through the Egyptian cosmology, and orange and golden yellow represent Sunday. So it made perfect sense. I don't know if she said, I'm gonna paint this orange, but you just never know.
You never know.
You never know. And and it's not that she didn't have any blue, because when you look at the flowers that are growing to the sides of her, there's blue, there's a sky blue in there. So the orange was very intentional. It was very intentional.
And
I know.
I'm sorry. Finish your.
I was going to say, I know you had. This was one of your favorites.
Oh yeah. Oh, I just love her, that she was a woman on this mission. You know, we talked about that before. Do artists have a responsibility? Like, she felt like her responsibility was from God, you know, to spread this message that God spoke to her. And who are we or anyone else to say that that wasn't the case? I read that she left her husband and declared that she was married to Jesus. and went down to New Orleans because she felt like that's where all the sinners were, and that she wanted to tell them the gospel as she knew it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what she spent the rest of her life doing. And I really admire that person who's willing to sacrifice everything for what they believe in. And I love that her artwork is so direct and so
Mm-hmm.
on. You know, we talked about the gaze looking straight at, more confrontational, very bold. And that's just like what she was, though. She wanted you to listen to what she was saying. You know, listen, because she felt like God told her that she has a mission. And I did read too that at the end of her life, she even stopped exhibiting because she felt like she was getting too much fame. I heard all these celebrities like Robert Duvall and like, I don't know, but Andy Warhol was like obsessed with her work, but she wasn't in it for the money. And by that time, she was already an elderly woman. And the last few years of her life, she wouldn't exhibit at all. She wanted to just preach the word of God. I think that's a beautiful thing.
Oh, yeah. And then one of the other things that I love about it is how she signs her name. And even though
Right.
you get Gertrude in one,
Yeah.
complete
Yeah.
space, she
Yeah.
starts it below the hand and finishes it above the shoulder.
Right.
So
And
I,
that's like Sarah Mary Taylor too,
Mhm.
right?
Yep,
Having that name ahead. And they want people to know, I'm proud of my artwork. I want you to know who made them.
that's right. That's right. Yes. So I guess we can now open
So
up for
we
questions.
can have questions.
So
Hello.
thank you so much for just a beautiful and generative conversation. I think, we were all seeing in the chat, everyone has just loved hearing from both of you. And I wanted to open the Q&A because we were receiving a number of questions about process, Isa.
Sure.
And if you might be willing to speak just a little bit to your process and maybe the work that's behind you.
Sure. Yeah, this is a piece that is in process right now. It's actually not sewn. This is just a quilt top that we talked about, and this is just pinned on. So my pieces in the beginning, they're just lightly tacked with fabric glue and pins, and I have to be pretty delicate with them as they are. And then after, well, it starts out with a sketch. I always bring out the same sketch, so this is my. So you start out with a sketch, but originally there's a photograph. Like I showed some of the photographs before, but the photo, that's one thing, but I need to know what's going to be light, what's going to be dark, what's going to be medium. So, and also I don't want people to worry about like thinking like, well, I can't draw well, because look at Sister Gertrude. Like, don't go to Photoshop, don't do that, because it's going to look too robotic, too perfect, and then you take the life right out of it. Make your sketch, whatever version of that is, and then you can cut as many fabrics as you want. I mean, I like to cut until I feel like that piece is molded. And then I have a piece here that's stitched, but let's see if I can. So I really apologize for
Oh,
this being
wait, this
crazy.
is like
Like
so behind the
it's so
scenes.
big.
It's really wonderful.
So she is from the front. Myra, this is a Dahomey warrior. So
Mhm.
we talked about Dahomey.
Yeah, the Dahomey
Yeah,
people,
this is the back.
they renamed themselves after,
Oh,
okay, so in 1897,
there.
I have to give
There
the
we
little
go.
history.
I know. Go
In
ahead.
1897, there was the punitive expedition where British goes over and there's a war pretty much, and they take everything and wipe out Benin, not the Benin that we know now, but the
Right.
but the royal court of Benin. So Dahomey renames itself Benin in honor of the royal court of Benin. So
Hmm.
that's how Dahomey comes in.
So that's so I wanted to do a piece of one of those female warriors or the female Amazons. But somebody asked once, like, so I just wanted you to see that the stitching goes all the way through. although it is applique, it's quilting at the same time because it's the whole quilt sandwich.
Mhm.
And yeah, so if I don't know if that's a 30-second explanation, that's how I make them.
Oh, that's wonderful. I think, and to me, the back of the work as well is really fantastic. And I know that we have a number of quilters on the call today, and yeah, it's just great to see that piece. Thank you for sharing it. We have a
Sure.
question for both of you that's about, I think that this one is really interesting. The question is, how has your age and experience changed your approach to activism through art? Or how has your approach to activism through art changed over time?
Well, I would say, I'll just say real quick, I'll be quick. I just want to say for myself, as I get older and get more experience, it just makes me sort of really zero in and say what I want to say more loudly. But when you look at my pieces that I did in college, they're really not that different of what I'm saying. I'm just learning to use the language more clear. It's like a little baby, you know. They can't, they say babies babble, they are talking, but we just can't fully understand them yet. And then they get more adept as they get older.
And for me, I'm so into documentation. Like that's my goal in life, is to document Black art, Black
Mhm.
artists who
Mhm.
are unsung heroes and sheroes.
Mhm.
When I was in graduate school, working on the PhD, I was on a committee, and I had a reader. The reader's job was not to like your work or dislike it. It was
Mhm.
to make sure you kept the path that the college set for its standards, or kept the standard.
Right.
And so that's my thing. So now that I'm older, um, I've gotten to the point where I can work with artists, and I may not hang their work in my home because it's just not me, but
Mhm.
it's important that what they do, because um, it's documenting history, and for me that's activism.
Right.
Wonderful. So we have two other questions I think we can close with, and one is another
Sure.
technical question, a question about how you source your fabrics, and in particular, the stories of the fabrics that you were speaking
Mhm.
about, sort of how you learned that and how that impacts your
Mhm.
choice, Lisa.
Well, I'm sourcing from anywhere I can, really. I mean, primarily though, I've been ordering from this particular company in Holland called Blisco. I think everybody who gets the Dutch wax fabrics, that name Dutch wax, is actually in Holland. And on their website, they do have some of the fabric stories. And then me and Myra had just discussed another book. I have another book that if you look on the BBC, and just look up like African stories, waxcloth, there was a book, but I just can't remember. But my father ordered it for me. And I think that African fabric is so interesting because it's the women in the marketplace who are actually naming the fabric, not the companies. The company sends it out to, let's say, the marketplace in the Cote d'Ivoire and says, this is a fabric of horses on it or whatever. And then when it gets to the Cote d'Ivoire, the women are like, oh, this is uh, I run faster than my enemies. That's what this represents. So then when the women start shopping for it, if you go to any of the stalls and you ask for the I run faster than my enemies, you're not going to ask for horses. And now the companies go back and they actually adopt those names. So it's sort of like in reverse. And I think that it's very interesting because the fabric all have these like fables and they have these histories attached to them. And I can use them in my artwork to increase the communication that I'm trying to do with the audience.
Yeah, and so it's a partnership now,
Right,
between Africa and the Dutch wax.
right,
Um, because some people have had issues with the Dutch textiles, but
yeah,
it really wouldn't sell if Africans didn't sell it, to be
No,
honest.
it would not.
To be
Who
honest.
else would be, yeah, who else would be buying it? That's their market.
I want to close our program tonight. It's 7:28. I'm going to allow us to run just a tiny bit long because I think that this last question is one that really relates to many of the themes that you've discussed this evening.
Sure.
And the question is, for both of you, did quilting run in your family? How did you come to quilting? And I know, Bisa, you talked about learning sewing, but in particular, is quilting something that you came to as an individual, or is this something that's passed down?
Yeah, that came to me as an individual. I mean, I did take fiber arts at Montclair State, and they did have we had one project, make a quilt. I think it was oven mitt size, and you could either do a landscape or you could do a block piece, and then that's when I decided I think I did my first one was a landscape. And then after that, I just started reading in books, and then I met up with people like Myra. But the quilters community would invite me to do a workshop on how to do a portrait, and then the other people at the workshop would be teaching me no, this is how you do the binding, no, this is how you do applique properly, or no, why don't you use this kind of stitch. So they definitely were, it was like this communion of ideas. I was teaching them about maybe drawing and the structure of a human face and how to select colors in order to mold a face, and they were teaching me the skills.
Yeah, I too am self-taught. I taught my mother how to quilt. I did see my grandmother, my great grandmother made these little circle things. I can't remember what they're called. The yo-yos. I did those, and but my mother's side tatted. They did tatting. They did the fine crochet. And then I sewed.
What is tatting?
It's where you use this tool, and it's an old, do you know this from the Folk Art Museum? It's
I have to look that up.
Use a tool. It's this tool you use, and it's like,
okay,
it's almost like a weight, and it's a process. So so that's what my family did on that side. But I studied and I perfected different techniques.
Oh, lace.
And so that's how I ended up quilting.
Tatting is also, it's similar to crochet. It's sort of like between crochet and lace making.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Beautiful. I'll look up a video so I can see it.
One thread, one long. I remember that. I didn't have patience for that.
Yeah.
Well, this has been fabulous, Persephone.
Yes,
so
indeed.
Much.
Yeah, thank you for this wonderful program. Thank you, Myra. It's so great to be able to talk to people. And thanks to everybody for joining.
Thank you so much, everyone that's out there in the internet world. I tell you, get to touch people all over the world, and it's so special, and I'm super grateful. Yeah.
Well, we want to thank you so much for sharing so much this evening. And I know that our time is short. It really flew by, an hour and a half, and we wish that we had many more hours to see your work and hear from you. And we can't thank you enough